What if the birth rate dropped to zero for 50 years? Imagine a world where children suddenly stop being born, not because of war, disease, or catastrophe. Humanity simply loses the ability to reproduce for 50 years. No newborn cries in maternity wards, no children's voices in the streets, no hope of continuing the line. This isn't just a demographic crisis, it's an experiment in the survival of a civilization that suddenly confronted its own morality. This scenario isn't entirely fantastical. In nature, there are cases where entire species temporarily lose reproductive ability due to environmental factors. Pandas in captivity often refuse to breed, and some bird species stop laying eggs under stress. Humans show a similar trend. In South Korea, the fertility rate has fallen to 0.78 children per woman, the lowest in the world. In Japan, the population declines by 400,000 people each year. Let's assume a hypothesis so precise it sends a chill down your spine. Starting tomorrow morning, the global birth rate falls to zero. Not for a week or a year, but exactly half a century. No pregnancies, no infant cries in the maternity hospitals of Tokyo, Lagos, or Kyiv. Biology acts as if someone pressed pause on the very principle of reproduction. Sex cells mature but do not fertilize. In vitro fertilization, donor programs, experiments with artificial wombs, nothing works. The cause is unknown, and it's not an epidemic, not a toxin in the water, not a plot, just zero. The first days would pass quietly. The sky wouldn't change color, people would go to work, fill the trolley buses, traffic lights would keep changing as always. But within a few weeks, obstetrician gynecologists would start speaking to each other anxiously. Do you also have no new cases? Births scheduled for the coming months would still happen. Those pregnancies began earlier. And then silence would fall. Hospital corridors without baby cries, neonatal units with a dull echo, and swings on playgrounds creaking only in the wind. The most tragic changes would be inside families. Young couples who planned to have children would find themselves in a vacuum of purpose. Many marriages would fall apart under the weight of unfulfilled dreams. Some couples would adopt pets, trying to fill the empty space of care. Others would focus on careers or travel, but the feeling of loss would stay with them forever. In the first year, neither the economy or politics would feel it yet. Headlines would split into two camps. This is a temporary anomaly and a world on the brink of extinction. Scientists would rush to find the cause, from possible mutations in receptors on the egg cell's membrane to hypotheses about global quantum fluctuations. Labs would work around the clock. Governments would announce unprecedented grant programs. For the first time in a long while, the public would feel the unity that humanity usually finds only in the face of a shared danger. Makers of children's goods would be in trouble within the first 2 years. Companies like Johnson & Johnson, which earn $15 billion a year on baby food and cosmetics, would start mass layoffs. The largest toy corporations, Mattel with $5.4 billion in revenue and Hasbro with $6.4 billion, would halt their lines. Children's clothing stores would turn into antique shops where people buy things as mementos of a former life. Children's literature would cease to be published. Cartoons and family films would disappear from screens. Fairy tales would remain only in the memories of the older generations. New Year's holidays would lose their magic because it always lived in children's eyes. Children's Day would become a day of mourning for a lost future. 5 years would pass, and the first holes would appear in the fabric of everyday life. Pediatric departments at medical schools would begin to be repurposed. You can't train doctors forever for patients who no longer exist. There are over 500,000 pediatricians working worldwide. All of them would gradually shift to general practice or gerontology. Some schools would turn into leisure centers for the elderly, chalkboards taken down, bright alphabet posters replaced by calm panels with large letters and call buttons. Demographers would explain a simple arithmetic to politicians. The global average life expectancy is about 73 years, which means that without new births, population would shrink only due to mortality. A rough calculation would sketch a grim outline. The world loses about 60 million people a year. Over half a century, Earth's population would fall from 8 to 4 billion. Yet, in the first 10 years, the decline would barely be noticeable. The large inertial generation is still alive, those who are 20 to 40 today. Streets are full of vigor, offices of energy, science, of discoveries. Only children's voices grow rare. By years 10 to 15, silence would stop being a metaphor. Municipalities would start decommissioning kindergartens, turning them into rehabilitation centers. In cities where every courtyard was once built for young families, management companies would redesign neighborhoods for barrier-free access. Where neighborhood kids' football clubs once met, they'd build covered walkways for slow strolling, and the bright markings of children's bike lanes would become a memory. The labor market would change gradually. With each passing year, there would be fewer workers. Professions tied to childhood would become mostly museum pieces: children's entertainer, preschool teacher, developer of educational games for preschoolers. In their place, disciplines that seemed niche yesterday would bloom. Occupational therapies for seniors, longevity architecture, interface design for trembling hands and slower sight. The auto industry would move to gentle dynamics, smooth acceleration, active attention monitoring systems, interiors designed for easy entry and exit for weak knees. Young people would become a minority, not only culturally, but mathematically. In Europe, the median age of a voter would rise from 47 to 65. Older people's influence in society would grow. Budgets would spend ever more on healthcare and elder care, not on education or children's sports. Still, society would find a bright side to this shift. Less violent crime. Statistically, most violent offenses are committed by people aged 15 to 25. More stable neighborhoods, greater appreciation for slow goods, quiet, cleanliness, safety. What seemed like a city for children in the 20th century would, by the mid-21st, turn into an age-friendly city. Universities would find themselves in a strange position. On one hand, science is vitally needed. We lack technologies that compensate for the disappearance of young hands. On the other, the number of applicants keep falling because every age cohort grows older with the calendar. In the US, the number of 18-year-olds would drop from 4.2 million to 0 in 2 decades. Second bachelor's programs for 50-year-olds would open. Learning would be integrated into life as regular firmware updates. Over time, society would think less about birth and more about the end of life. People over 60 would work longer, not only for financial need, but because there simply aren't enough other workers. Retirement age would be set not by a fixed date, but by health status and biological indicators. Automation would get a powerful boost. Amazon already uses about 520,000 robots in its warehouses. In 20 years, without new workers, such systems would become not a luxury, but a necessity. Robots would replace cashiers, cleaners, couriers, drivers. Universal basic income would become not a social experiment, a way of survival for millions whose jobs vanished along with the young generation. Nature would feel a curious mix of effects. Consumption of growth goods would plunge. Fewer new children's campuses would mean a savings of 50 million tons of cement annually. Less single plastic for parties and grow into clothes would cut polymer production by 15%. Carbon emissions tied to production for young households would fall by 2 billion tons over a decade. Demand would rise for medical services, care, heating and cooling homes, since older people tolerate cold and heat worse. Hospitals would consume several times more electricity. An older nation would prize parks and quiet more, so green areas would expand. At the same time, urban heating and water networks would suffer more outages because there wouldn't be enough workers for rapid repairs. Technology would try to replace the absence of children with artificial companions. Even now, Japan produces about 40,000 companion robots a year. In a world without births, this market would grow by hundreds of times. We'd see humanoid companions with smooth motor skills and pleasant voices, and home AI systems capable of remembering family stories, marking anniversaries, and even singing familiar songs together with their owners. By year 25, a huge gap in the population pyramid would be visible. The youngest are already 40, and behind them is emptiness. The housing market would flip. Apartments with children's rooms would sit idle. In the US, prices for houses with 4 or more bedrooms would fall by 60%. Where people split responsibilities, someone cooks, someone repairs, someone handles the bills. And still, people being people, we wouldn't give up. Biologists would learn to create sex cells from stem cells and improve artificial wombs. Spending on reproductive research would rise from $2 to $200 billion a year. Yet, under our hypothesis, the result would remain 0. zero, it would be a decade of painful realization. We have the technology, but it doesn't work. By the 40th year, the absence of queues for kindergartens would surprise no one. There simply are no children. People would get used to living with a short planning horizon. But another problem would appear: the disappearance of certain skills, professions passed directly from master to apprentice, like violin making or the training of test pilots, would become rare. We'd realize a nation is not only numbers and GDP, but also a heritage of knowledge and traditions carried across generations. And then the 50th year, some Monday in autumn, when the morning sky looks exactly as always, in a small district clinic on the outskirts of Lima, a young obstetrician who had seen childbirth only in a virtual simulator suddenly gets lab confirmation, a positive test, then another, a third, 100th from different countries, different continents. News feeds change faster than the screen can refresh. No one fixed anything. The countdown simply ended. Life, which had stubbornly kept silent for half a century, seemed to sigh. It's hard to overstate the world's reaction. Joy and tears and panic. We've lost half a century of practice. Pediatric departments have been disabled, and awards and equipment repurposed for adult rehabilitation. Over time, doctors lost experience treating children because it was no longer needed. Now, protocols must be rewritten urgently, training revised, factories brought back online, universities reopened departments of perinatology, and older specialists become mentors. Their hands remember more than their brains. Cities had set a course for old age and suddenly realized there were no stroller rooms, no safe courtyards, no available pediatricians. We need new public kindergartens, milk kitchens, maternity care routes. Our homes, tuned for quiet evenings, must once again hear a child's cry. Psychologically, this return would be no less difficult than the zero period itself. For 50 years, people practiced finishing. Now, we must learn to begin again. Politics will pivot a second time. Years later, historians will call it a new beginning, the moment when, after a long pause, humanity decided to restore births, not as instinct, but as a conscious choice. The most important resource will be trust. It's what will help quickly train new specialists, redistribute resources, and fix social inequalities. The lesson will be simple and painful. Young people are not just future workers and taxpayers. They are what turn ideas into action, dreams into work. Paradoxically, 50 years without children could teach us the true value of childhood. Those who lived through this era would treat children with a reverence our generation lost in routine. Every child's laugh would be music, every first step a miracle. Perhaps the most important lesson of this experiment is that children are not only the continuation of the line, they are carriers of hope, a source of meaning, a bridge between past and future. A world without children is a world without tomorrow, where each day becomes a step toward the end of history. And perhaps it is precisely the awareness of this truth that would help us value more the miracle we take for granted today, the children's voices outside the window that remind us life goes on.